Hi, everyone. This is Craig Zelzer back with another live stream of the Social Change Career Podcast. Today, we're going to be talking with Jack Brewster, the CEO and founder of Newsreel, which we'll get into, also a journalist, a founder, someone who's got a lot of experience on the good and the bad of media and trying to build solutions to help create a much more healthy media ecosystem. The title of today's episode is Why I Left Journalism to Fix How People Get Their News. For people who may not have joined a PCDN live stream before, three quick kind of overviews. First, we deeply enjoy hearing from people, whether you're watching on LinkedIn or YouTube. So please put your comments in the chat and we'll try to weave them in, your questions, resources. Please follow Jack and Newsreel on LinkedIn and other channels, and please try out the app. We will talk a lot about that. And then for PCDM, please check out all our resources. And then if you are a fan of podcasts, I'm addicted to podcasts, too much to listen to, not enough time, but amazing. The number one thing you can do for any podcast host is take a 20 seconds, rate it, and share it. So hopefully it's for this podcast, but any podcast you like, just do that, whether it's on Apple, Spotify, share it with your friends. It just helps the impact grow. So Jack spent years inside legacy newsrooms watching young people drift away from the news. Today is the founder and the CEO of Newsreel, a social news app where vetted journalists publish short-form interactive stories designed to help people, young people, but also all people, build daily news habits. What began as a Fulbright research question, fellow Fulbrighter, about how young audiences actually consume information has grown into a platform live in schools, universities, and libraries across the US with a public release set for May 11th, but you can try it in the beta form. Jack is, again, the founder of Newsreel. Before that, he was a journalist at Forbes and enterprise editor at NewsGuard, covering misinformation, politics, and digital media. In 2024, he broke the story uncovering the source of the viral false claim that Haitian migrants were eating pets in Springfield, Ohio. Still can't believe like the state of the news and media is like, they're eating the cats and dogs, like that actually gets coverage.
Crazy.
His work has appeared in the Wall Street Journal, Time, Vice, Fortune, and Newsweek, and his research has been cited by the New York Times, the Washington Post, Bloomberg, and CNN, among others. He's a former Fulbright Research Fellow in Germany. I was a Fulbrighter in Hungary, I think I'm a little older than you, where he studied how young people consume news, and he was on the Forbes 30 Under 30 list in 2025. And Newsreel was named a 2025 Resource of the Year by the National Association for Media Literacy and Education. I'm based in Medellin, Colombia. Jack is based in New York. And thank you so much for making time, Jack. And just to start off with, we've already chatted some previously, but did you envision yourself working in media? Is there anyone in your family who was a media professional? And
Always.
how did you, we had Mohammed Leela last week, the founder of Goodable, former war journalist who worked for all over the world. So what did you envision yourself doing in media?
So my parents met as journalists. They actually met on the 31st floor of the Time Life building all the way back in the 1980s. My dad was a senior editor there for Life magazine. My mom worked for the in-house magazine, like covering news about the company. So journalism is in my blood. I've been around it my entire life. I had really interesting dinner conversations growing up. I pretty much knew I wanted to go into media from a pretty early age, but got the bug my sophomore year of college, like really hard. And I knew that I wanted to work around politics, but I didn't really know how, like, what kind of journalist I was going to become. But I got the bug as a New York Daily News reporter back in 2015. And over time, like, I was always somebody who was like interested in innovation and gadgets and technology, and I think that kind of like started to merge with my interest in journalism from a pretty early standpoint. So that was where kind of like how I got to where I am now. Yeah.
And then were you in university? Were you part of a school newspaper? Like when did you first start writing? Did you do blogging? You started writing for a local newspaper, freelancing? Like when did you first start landing, whether it was paid or just your work was getting known? And do you remember your first story? And then how did you start landing journalism positions?
So my first journalism experience was at the Overland Review in college. That was the school newspaper there, and I covered. I think it was a football game. I think was my first article. And then my first article for like a national publication was that summer. I started writing a lot for the paper and was able to land an internship at the New York Daily News. And so my first article, I think, though, was about like they put me on something like about Ray Liotta, I think it was, because he went on like a morning show. It was a really weird article, but I was so excited just to like have my name on next to that masthead, like on the internet. It was, I just remember like just freaking out about it. It was like the silliest story, but I just felt like ecstatic to see my name in print, even though it wasn't, it was online. So yeah, that was where I like started my career. Yeah.
So people are commenting on LinkedIn. We have people watching from Kenya and all over the world. So please let us know where you're watching from, your questions, your comments, and a bit about your background. So thinking about, at Oberlin, did you study communicate? I mean, for people who aren't based in the U.S., can you share a little about what Oberlin is
Oh,
known
sure.
for? And did
Yeah.
you study communications, journalism, and just kind of what skills did you develop both within the classroom and outside that helped you advance a career in journalism?
Oberlin has a very rich history. It was the first school in the United States to admit people of color and women. It has a strong protest history as well. It was played a part in the Underground Railroad in the 1800s and other protest movements throughout the 1900s. It's known as a school where people go and tackle difficult conversations. It was definitely I had very interesting conversations in politics classes, which is what I majored in, and it still, I think, today has like sort of a rebellious nature to it. And I loved going there. It was a wonderful place to become a journalist. There's a rich history of journalists that attended Oberlin College, including Peter Baker, the White House correspondent for the New York Times, as well as a number of others. So it was a wonderful place to kind of grow into my own, and I take a lot of lessons I learned there and apply it to what I do now. Yeah.
Okay. And I mean, I am not a journalist. I have lots of friends who have practiced or are practicing journalists. And I'm just thinking a friend of mine, I used to be her boss, I won't say where, but she went and did a master's in journalism overseas and came back and had the dream of being a journalist. And this is probably late 90s, early 2000. Got a really good journalism degree and then landed a job at a community newspaper and did it for a while. But the amount of articles she was expected to produce, this is, like when the internet was just launching. So, it was just insane for like a pitiful salary. So eventually she pivoted to something else. I mean, the skills are amazing. So can you talk a little bit about, when you finished Oberlin, and also for people who are thinking about, let's say, traditional or legacy media, like
Yeah.
what first jobs did you land, and what was like the wonderful things about it, and then what were some of the challenging things? And obviously, the media landscape has changed a lot.
Yeah, so I started freelancing like right out of college. I had done several internships, but I couldn't land like a job right away. But I knew I wanted to go into news, and it was hard for sure. And some of the first like jobs I had was like freelancing. So I got hired by Vice News to cover like the Paul Manafort trial. So he was the former Trump campaign manager, and I got to go to DC and or maybe I guess it was in Virginia, and cover that trial. And it was a thrilling experience. Like it was definitely like taught me a lot, but very little pay, and was obviously just like short term. So that was like my first real, like, I would say, because it was actual assignment. Like I was there for several weeks covering it, and that ended up being my first job out of college. And the funny story there is like I was expected to go inside the court and out, and I was running back and forth. I also had my car there because like I had to drive to where the editor was, because like there wasn't any cell service inside the like courtroom and even outside of it. So I was backing up and was rushing to tell him something that just happened, and drilled the like parking lot pole near my car. So I think I ended up losing money on that first assignment because I had to pay for all the damages to my car.
And can you talk about, and then did you, I mean, you've written for lots of outlets. So
Yeah.
did you do freelancing for multiple years? Did you land like, because a dream of a lot of journalists is to
Yeah.
get something where they're not freelance. It depends on the kind of journalism you want to do, but if you're doing journalism, you want your expenses covered and you want to
Oh
have health
yeah.
insurance. And so,
Yeah.
did you freelance and build your career that way? Did you wind up working full time for one or more media outlets?
Yeah, so I freelanced for Vice, freelanced for Newsweek, freelanced for a couple other publications, and then got a job at Forbes in 2019. So I worked there as a politics reporter covering online extremism, QAnon, some politics coverage as well. And it was an amazing time to be at Forbes with the everything that was happening with COVID, with the second Trump campaign, and I really started to develop like a beat there with the QAnon coverage that I did. And Forbes news team has tremendous reach. It's still a very established brand. I did get health insurance and all the benefits. So that was my first like full-time gig in news.
And welcome, Tanya from San Francisco. Please keep letting us know where you're watching from. So, if you think, in your focus, obviously at the Manafort trial, or if you were covering different things, like when did you? I mean, there's always been mis and disinformation. So, first of all, could you define what those things are, and can you then talk about like, was that always part of your interest, or as like, when did you start kind of moving to understanding, you know, I mean, disinformation is worse than misinformation, but just kind of like explain like when did you become interested in that as one of the areas in which you would focus your work?
So the definition of misinformation is a false narrative that something that is again like not true based on a set of facts, usually determined by hopefully scientific method or some kind of processy. Disinformation is purposefully shared, so it's purposely shared false information. So most famous examples obviously are uh, Russia during the 2016 election, other kind of disinformation. When you hear disinformation campaigns, that's usually a like bad actor or government that is purposely weaponizing false information to sway an election or move markets or something like that. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So I really became fascinated by it when I was covering it for Forbes. Like I didn't really think about conspiracy theories all that much before then. But when you're covering something, especially like QAnon, you have to sort of sink into it. And it just fascinated me. My mom ended up leaving journalism to become a therapist, so I've always had a background like in where I would be thinking about sort of like not only like what's happening in the world, but like why are people like who are the people behind it and why are they doing it. And it just fascinated me like why someone would become captivated by something like QAnon. And when you start reporting on it, you find out that it makes sense. It's like a video game, and it's incredibly entertaining uh, to report on and cover, even as how horrible it is of a topic. So I really became fascinated by that, and then also how the internet was promoting it. Why was this claim taking off in the way that it did? As you said, you're absolutely right. Misinformation has been around forever, since the dawn of time. What's changed now is the tools to disseminate it. And I was fascinated by the latter there. Like, why did this claim take off when it did? Why was this so powerful? And what was the sort of structure of our information landscape doing to promote it? As I was watching myself, and I'm sure we'll start to get into this, my own journalism be filtered and disseminated in certain ways that obscured the truth. So it really was a like very important moment in my career, because I not only was sort of becoming fascinated with what I was covering, but also sort of thinking more broadly, stepping back, like what is the purpose of what I'm doing as a journalist, and what can I do on the infrastructure level to help improve it?
So many questions. I want to start with one just very practical one. So, can you talk about whether it's Forbes or, again, this is pre-generative AI, things have changed
Yeah.
so much, but just like, did you have a set number of articles? You had to produce your videos, like, and did you carry a notebook? You carried a digital recorder, and how did you find what from a journalist perspective? There's so many things you could explore.
Yeah.
So how
Yeah.
did you decide? Like, how do you decide? Like within QAnon, like this is the thing you wanted to explore. Did the editor ask you, or like just a little bit about the nuts and bolts of like what you
Sure.
did and the scope of what was expected?
Yeah, we were expected to file a certain number of stories. I don't remember the exact number now. There was an expectation though that you would cover a certain number of stories a week. And I think anyone starting out in journalism, especially one that's sort of based around traffic, that is often the case. Like they are less concerned with sort of the assignment that you're doing, and first and foremost, like what are you providing in terms of content? And there's obviously problems there, right? With there can be problems with that kind of structure, especially at some other media companies I know that have definitely abused that model, right? That are like constantly stoking the content machine and trying to pump out as much as they can to capitalize on the ad based revenue models that so many companies are still dependent on. I think Forbes strikes a pretty good balance, and I was expected to really file some some important stories, do original journalism, do original reporting. And the way I fell into the QAnon thing was like I was already sort of covering Trump and right wing politics, and QAnon really started to gain traction around that time that I was covering Trump. And I don't remember exactly what the first story was, but like I remember pitching something related to it. It did very well, and then I sort of just became kind of fascinated by it. And it was almost my own curiosity that sort of drove the coverage of it. And once you get curious about something, then your stories become better. And when your stories become better, then you're assigned to beat. So it was, I think, kind of popped up organically, and eventually my one of my editors was like, Jack, you're on the QAnon beat. And that was not always the necessarily the thing that I was proudest to say at the time, especially with how horrible the news was around it and it continues to be. But I found it fascinating to cover, and even as dark as it is.
So we have some questions coming in, but I want to ask one more, let's say, big question. Then we'll get into some questions from the audience in Newsreel. So I'm older than you. I'm 55, and
Yep.
I remember I moved overseas. I was on a Fulbright. First, I did junior abroad, then Fulbright. So I
Yep.
was in Hungary in the early 90s. You watched that transition, and I had email, but I had never had access to the internet, like never. And then I moved back to the US. 95. I was like, the internet is here, the age of information, the peace dividend, everything's going to be wonderful. And now we all have universal access. Well, not, I mean, digital divide, but we have access to information. And it really
Yeah.
was this optimistic period. And the idea that we would have, 10, 20 years later, we'd have more information than ever, but more purposeful disinformation and propaganda and the lack of truth. So just like so there's two questions here. Like if someone asks you if you're at a party and someone's like, oh, you used to cover QAnon, like, how does that factor in? Like we should be, there should be more trust in the media and more trust in the news, and we've done the exact opposite. Like, what's your
Mm.
explanation for that? And then, similar to, let's say, Bitcoin, is there an origin story of like, where in the world, like, who is behind QAnon, or
Hmm.
like, where does it come from, and how much is like, you know, I mean, whatever you're comfortable sharing. Obviously, like, you may not want to.
No, yeah, no, two great questions. So on trust, I think the reason why we there's so much lack of trust in media right now is that the tools that we're using to get our information now have separated almost everything that gave us trust in media in the first place from the content that we're getting. And what I mean by that more simply is that the social media works as hard as it possibly can to promote certain kinds of content that are entirely antithetical to the process of a journalist. When you're writing as a journalist, you're reporting for an editor who is often, if they're a good editor, very concerned with nuance. And the social media feeds are entirely they function the entire opposite, right? And so I don't. Sometimes people, there's been all this stuff about the death of truth, death of truth, death of truth. I really think it's just the death of nuance and the promotion of nuance and the ability for nuance to go viral. Like it's we've adopted a world where mostly run by big tech companies, and they have done everything in their power to push down nuance because it doesn't sell on these ad-based models. So it's no surprise that we don't have much trust in journalists, right? Everyone can get have their own feed, they can have their own social media platform, they can get information themselves. So why would they trust a gatekeeper? Why would they trust somebody who's trying to tell them how the world is in a nuanced format? Because everything that they have elsewhere is working actively against that. So I'm not shocked at all that people don't have trust in the media. It makes total sense. I totally wish we didn't have that world, but I mean, we are the products of our, the tools of our time, and we've chosen or we've adopted a world run by social media. And when you go on social media, it does not care about levels of information or expertise. All it cares about is what's viral right now. So it doesn't surprise me. I wish we could get into this more, but I wish I think there's basic reforms that we can make to have a better internet. But all right, is that going to happen? I don't have much faith in that anytime soon. On your second question, um, about the origin of QAnon. So QAnon came out of Pizzagate. Pizzagate was another viral conspiracy theory that basically claimed that there was like a viral child sex trafficking ring in a pizza restaurant in oh man, Maryland or Virginia.
Washington D.C. It was in D.C. I'm pretty sure.
Yeah, it was in DC. And at this restaurant called, I think it was Comet Pizza, and it grew up mostly on Reddit, and people believed that there were like politicians running this sex trafficking ring inside this pizza, so much so that a gunman went to the pizza restaurant and tried to shoot up the place. He didn't succeed, but it grew out of that, and there was a huge fanning of this conspiracy theory right around the 2016 election with Hillary Clinton. Her being married to Bill did not help, and then the internet really did most of the rest. And what was we're still not fully sure who is behind QAnon. Like there's some reporting about that it is this one guy that actually like ended up running for Congress in Arizona. But it's what I think was really like the reason why it took off so much. As I said, it was like there was all these sort of drops they called it drops, these like sort of specks of information that this person claiming to be QAnon was dropping on 4chan and message boards, and it became this game, like these sort of like weirdly written notes that only certain people understand, and it ricocheted across the internet and took off. So it still has a cult following. It's not nearly what it was because the whole claim was that Trump was going to save the world from this child sex trafficking ring. And as we know now with the Epstein news, there's a lot of people, a lot of his supporters who believe the opposite now. So it's really gone down, I think, in its relevancy. But for a long time, it was a really big, had a really big cult following. Yeah.
Yeah. I'm reading. I'm always listening to audiobooks and reading books, and so I started reading Upton Sinclair's what's his famous book. I'm going blank on the title.
Oh yeah.
The packaging industry, the meat packing industry.
Yeah.
But it's like the jungle. I think I forgot the name, but like
yes.
But it's just interesting because it's written 100 years ago, and it talks so much about disinformation and power. And then I'm also listening to 1929 from Andrew Sorkin, which is it's like the idea of like media and disinformation. Like it's been around for so long. So I want to bring in a question from Stevie. Sure. Tried to post it here, but I'll just read it to you. Let me just find it here. I work in the immigration resettlement ecosystem, and the topic of disinformation and data mining is a big topic right now, from everything from coercion to exploitation. And I wonder if Newsreel or anyone in the media tech ecosystem is thinking of this type of resource platform or learning and development tool for specific populations and institutional information.
Good question. So there are definitely newsrooms that are tackling niches like that one, that are trying to really focus on communities and growing civic engagement and news literacy within specific communities. A lot of nonprofit companies are doing this. There's the Institute for Nonprofit News that's done a lot of work on this. The Knight Foundation has done a lot of work with infrastructure and journalism. There are a lot of collectives that have popped up now recently that are sort of trying to bring different journalists together to focus on this. And what Newsreel is trying to do, my company, is also in a way what you're talking about. We're early in our development, so like the sort of very niche news that you may need, we don't have that yet. But what we are trying to do is build a platform for trusted, verified creators and journalists that have to go through a process to start publishing on our platform, recognizing that people don't want to get news from just one source anymore. At the same time, they don't want the chaos of the feeds. And so I think this play of working on the infrastructure behind news and trying to bring some of the journalists together, some of the news outlets together, some even of the creators together is essential work that is mostly being done right now in the nonprofit space, but it's I think what my company is doing and there's some others as well in the for-profit space. It is moving that direction because I think the pendulum has swung so far towards independent journalism, independent creators, and this we're just living in such a fractured media landscape that I think the pendulum has to swing back, and I do think you're going to see more collectives and sort of media operatives pop up.
Yeah, so I just one comment. I think the age, the information age, which we're now deep into it. There's so much. We're all swimming in information. We've all hit platform overload and app overload and
Yeah.
everything overload, and it's really now about trust and curation, and that
Oh yeah.
and so finding the places you can be like, yeah, that's an interesting, whether someone's curating it or it's a platform, you be like, I can trust, or at least I understand their perspective, and they, so. But I think that so want to take one step back, then we'll get into newsreel. So I was a Fulbright. I just want to tell a very quick story because fellowships changed my life, and I've done a lot of fellowship
Yeah.
advising. So I did junior abroad in Hungary, ended the Cold War, amazing experience. I went back and I had like an advisor. She's like, apply for a Fulbright. I'm like, that's only for important people. And she was persistent. So I applied and I wound up getting it for 2 years, changed my life, amazing things. But, and so can you just talk about like how Fulbright fits into this and just any advice for people because many people think of fellowships only like academic fellowships, and there's
Mhm.
so many ways to advance your skills and career through professional and other kinds of fellowships. So just how did you find Fulbright? What did you do? And just reflections for others on fellowships.
So I applied to Fulbright because my ex-girlfriend at the time was applying to fellowships, and she was fascinated. She was, fascinated in different programs. She ended up not getting any of the fellowships, and I got Fulbright. So I only applied to Fulbright because of that. But when I got there and ended up doing it, what made it such a valuable experience was definitely the sort of unstructured time that it allowed me. Like, there's no other moment in your life when you get that kind of like just completely unstructured, no expectations on you time. And I was able to just focus on like news avoidance. That was my topic. I was entirely just reading books, researching, speaking to people. I didn't even have to like there was no like formal structure about like where this I did a research paper had to be sent. I ended up sending it to a lot of people and working I was about 100 pages long, but it was amazing that once you got through the application process, mine was not a teaching scholarship, which is what some of the people go to Fulbright for, but just a research one. You're really allowed to do whatever you want, and I just found it one of the most important experiences of my life. Look, when I was working at Forbes, I had to help the company turn a profit. When you're at school, you have to work under the whatever a professor is telling you to do, whatever you have grades often, right? But with Fulbright, I didn't have either of those things, so there was no expectations except to learn and enrich yourself. And so, oh my god, I got so much out of it. It made me very much the man I am now, and it set me up to start a company like Newsreel. I really, really forced me to sort of think, okay, like step back for a second. What can you offer to the world right now that maybe is not being served by the free market?
Yeah. So for my Fulbright, it was research, and I was supposed to be doing research, and actually changed. And with another Fulbrighter, we set up an NGO and did
Mm-hmm.
amazing work. And and I've had other fellowships. Again, like fellowships are amazing, and so we do a lot of PCM, Pro Fellow, Fulbright, Dad, Chevening, Schwartzman. Like if you there's so many out there, so please don't ignore that in your career path. So did you speak German when you went to
A
Germany?
little
Like
bit,
you went
yeah.
to,
I did a little bit. You ended up really not needing to as much because, like, I ended up learning it, and then everyone spoke English, so I'd try to speak German, and then just speak back to me in English.
and then from your research from the paper, obviously that could be
Yeah.
20 conversations. But what when you were thinking about news avoidance, like what was the central focus, and then how did you operationalize that? So just for anyone, like, 'cause that's one of the challenges of research, like there's a million questions, and so how did, like, any if other people are doing research from your own, like how did you go from news avoidance to like what does that actually mean, and then exploring it, and then what are some things that either surprised you or that confirm what you already thought?
Well, the first common misconception about news avoidance, which is now like a formal academic term, which literally just means that you are avoiding the news. There's this common misconception that young people are the ones that avoid news the most. Yes, some studies say that that's true, but only slightly. We all avoid the news, all groups, all demographics. Yes, some older groups avoid it somewhat less than young people, but we all are avoiding the news. And one of the things that came out of my research was that in the age of it was before the AI era, but like I was the introduction of ChatGPT, but I was writing and researching for that world that was coming. We need to, as journalists, take a vested interest in how our articles are delivered so that they are really truly offering something much, much different than what somebody can get from just a random site or on the internet or AI, a large language model. You have to offer uniquely human experiences, one that are really, really, really highlight your expertise and provide new fun ways to engage your audiences. So a lot of what I did research on was like gamification, on interactivity, on like offering radical transparency about that journalist and what those things and others can provide to the audience member to get them to develop a more direct relationship with you, because as we know we've now live in an age where like people are so separated from the news brands that are out there. People have very little relationship with even the creators that they say that they follow. If you go on the street and you say, hey, where do you get your news? 9 times out of 10 people are going to say social media or something like it. They're going to tell you a few shows, maybe even your show that they like, and then you're going to ask, hey, do you listen to the show every week? And again, 9 times out of 10 then you're going to say, no, I just watch it on clips on my feed. So we're so far removed from having that direct relationship with the reporter. And so I think, and this is what the research said, journalists have to work 10 times harder than they already are at get when they finish a piece of reporting, they're offering many different ways for that audience member to engage with it.
And then one more question, then we'll move into newsreel. And again, for people watching, please let us know where you're watching from, questions, comments. So I thinking back, again, when CNN first came out,
Mm-hmm.
it was pretty high quality and quite interesting. Now it is just like most other channels. But we're in an age of 24/7 or 168-hour. There's no break to the news feed. So like, any thoughts what that means for people who are in the media ecosystem as journalists or creators, and also for the consumers, like, because it
Yeah.
used to be, I mean, I remember I used to like reading the newspaper. This is going back
Yeah.
a long time ago, especially the Sunday paper. I haven't bought a paper in a million years, but I do pay for some subscriptions, because media, it is important to support media. But like, it's like, it's breaking news nonstop. So just any thoughts? I mean, it's a big question, but both for like journalists, like how do you have a life if you need to report, create, engage, gamify, and then if you're a consumer, just like any thoughts on, because some people say it's actually healthy not to consume a lot of media. because
Absolutely.
there's
Yeah.
so much negative media, or like if it bleeds, it leads, or whatever the equivalent is
Yeah.
in the AI age.
Yeah, I mean, if you read like Walter Lippmann, he talks all the time about like creating like was it zone or spheres of silence, I think he calls it, or something like that. And what he means is that like he's a media theorist and reporter, that as a member of a democracy, like in order to perform your duties, like you have to bake in time for critical thinking. You can't just be watching, reading, consuming news 24/7. It's not healthy. It's not healthy as a democratic citizen. It's also not healthy just as a human being to be constantly consuming news. And I don't think it's productive. And what you find now is a lot of people, that are just sort of removing themselves entirely. And I think more so to blame than journalists and news cycles and 24/7 CNN is social media and the tools of our time, because when you go on Instagram or TikTok, you have very little sway over what you're actually seeing. They've started to do this now with algorithms, right? Like you can actually start to customize it a little bit on even on X now. You can filter some of your feed, but still, can't tell you how many times I go on social media now and I see somebody getting shot or I see a natural disaster happening. That's not even from necessarily a news provider. It's just what's popping up on my feed. Something horrible happening. So this is again, like I think more of a product of the new editors that we have, which are the modern day newspaper is not New York Times. Modern day newspaper is TikTok and Instagram and X and all these social platforms. Soon it will be AI, and I think those are more what we should be focusing on when it comes to like mental health and news consumption. But as a journalist, like I think absolutely, like we have a responsibility to think about how much news we're producing and be respective of people's time and their mental health, and also like consider that not everything has to be breaking news, right? And I think the reason why we've gone into this down this rabbit hole, maybe I think people would say, I don't necessarily have science to back this up, but that the news has moved more towards like just breaking news all the time. But why have we done that? It's because the business model has been dying, right? It's been like a sort of either you pump out news or you die, and that is a horrible rock choice between a rock and a hard place. But it's where journalists and news outlets have been. I think we have an opportunity now in the AI age to move away from that, because what is going to be the scarce resource we talked about earlier in this interview is going to be trust. It's going to be critical thinking. It's going to be thinking deeply. And I hope that journalists move away from the traffic model and towards new models that force people or help people think more deeply about certain issues and sort of pressing issues of our time.
Thank you so much. I'm going to bring in two questions from the audience, then we'll get more into Newsreel. I'm trying to post them here, but for some reason that's not working. So the next one comes from Meryl, who works at the Amazon Conservation. Why do you think it's increasingly difficult to find reporting in the mainstream news that you can find on social media? Ideally, I would like to verify something I see with a reputable outlet, but it's been quite difficult. There's like two different questions there.
Well, yeah. So the first of all, like what I'll say is like I'm not saying you do this, but like so many times I'll see people on X or Blue Sky or Instagram or TikTok say, "Why isn't the mainstream media covering it?" And they actually did cover it. It's just like it didn't show up on your feed. And I'm not saying that this whoever asked the question is doing that, but I just want to say like I often find that happening. And whenever somebody says that, it's just like, okay, well, it's just that's your algorithm. Like you're not seeing it, and that doesn't mean it doesn't exist. But what I will say is like the whole institution of like, so I used to be in the world of fact checking. I used to work for NewsGuard, and the problem that fact checkers have is like there's so much information out there, and it's impossible to report on it at the speed that you actually need to. And so like you often get information like debunking something you see on online. And the reason why you haven't seen a journalist or a news outlet cover it is often because like, an article when you publish a fact check has to go through like 4 layers of approval, right? It's certain news outlets. It has to be edited. You have to go track down people to interview. Like you're dealing with like issues of libel and defamation, and that slows down the process. So the institution of news and journalism is just not set up for our time and what you're asking from it. And that's a problem. That's why I have sort of soured on fact checking, ironically. I'm really more interested in something called pre-bunking instead of debunking. And pre-bunking is basically the notion that we should be giving people information about the sources where they're getting their news before they encounter it. And that is more powerful than seeing a fact check after the fact. I'm very bullish on that. It's basically like giving people a vaccine almost. And what that means, like it can mean something even as small as like what X did a few months ago, which is they now show on some of the accounts the country of origin. So if you're in Macedonia and you're you're commenting on Trump, and people will now see that you're based in Macedonia and like wonder why you're covering Trump, because you know, are you actually interested in our politics, or do you have the expertise to do so, or are you just trying to make money through its creator revenue sharing program? So that's like some of the basic stuff. The more effective pre-bunking would be if I have shared AI generated misinformation before, or I was one of the big disinformation spreaders of the false narrative that the 2020 election was stolen. That shows up on somewhere on my profile, or it's in a place where I can easily access information. That's just not on any of the social media platforms. Like we have no idea why someone's banned and then put back on.
Mhm.
We don't really know anything information about them other than their short bio that they put.
So actually, I'll bring in Stevie's question in a second, but two questions here. So one is, I have friends who work for different media platforms, pretty high up on trust and safety,
Mhm.
and content moderation, which is different than pre-bunking, is gone for a lot of platforms,
Oh yeah.
especially in AI. And so there's two questions here. So one is, um, well, a little bit about when you were working for NewsGuard, like fact checking,
Mhm.
like because it is interesting. You're saying so, like what? Because there's a lot of things like if it's already been reported, it's hard to take it back, even if it is false. So a little bit
Mhm.
like, what was your experience as a fact checker, and what were you fact checking, and how did it wind up like on at NewsGuard or on your desk or laptop, and like what was,
So
and then
yeah.
go ahead.
Yes. So I didn't do I did some fact checking, but I was brought in as like their investigative editor. So I actually did more like misinformation, like narrative tracking, and like also reporting on like the systems behind false information. I did do some like big stories where I like would go fact check something, but a lot of my reporting was on, and what I'm more interested in is like the sort of systems behind it, like what is enabling those things to spread. Because as we all know, like you can find, if you just go to any of these platforms, you can come across some piece of misinformation in about 0.2 seconds, right? So there's just so much out there, and when you're doing that kind of reporting, you have to sort of focus in on what is truly like having an impact, not just necessarily like what's viral. Even like we if otherwise you're just gonna be promoting a false narrative and like giving it more fire, right? So you have to be very careful about what you choose to report. And that actually goes to the last question that we got, right? So like sometimes you may not see a debunk of something because that news organization doesn't want to add fuel to the fire, right? That they don't necessarily want to boost that claim because they don't think it's gotten enough and had enough impact or spread. So that's something that I would say, yeah.
I'm going to bring in a question again from Stevie, and then we'll get into Newsreel. So, is Newsreel providing content in various languages? Congrats. So maybe answer Stevie's question, and also just like the origin story of Newsreel. How it's been incubating, and where you hope you're going.
Yeah, so we launched publicly to the App Store on May 11th, and shortly thereafter, we'll be having more content in various languages. Right now, it's only English based. We did that purposefully. Like we wanted to, like, we only have so much staff and so much funding, and like we've gotten a lot of interest from other countries around the world, and I just don't have the staff yet to fully like provide the level of content that I want for it. So yeah, like we eventually will get there. We're just not we're only English language right now. Yeah.
And then can you talk about this, the origin study of
Oh,
newsreel,
origin
and
story. Yeah, yeah. Sorry.
where did you, what, was it you, it's been germinating for a long time and you took the jump, you like, you saw something and just realized the existing solutions weren't working, and then, what is it? So like, what is newsreel offering, and what's the business model? What challenge are you hoping to address?
So I've had this idea for a long, long time, all the way back in college. I um, was on the baseball team at Oberlin, and I was reporting on a lot of these stories about the 2016 election, and found that none of my peers were engaging with the content that I was producing or any other journalist was producing. And this is at a school like Oberlin, one of the best schools in the country. And at the same time, I was going to these internships where my articles were being, I worked for Time Magazine, the New York Daily News, and others. Where it was being read for like seconds on average. Like if you go look at some of the stats of your articles when you work at these big publications, you're just like so disheartened sometimes, because it's like literally 4 seconds on average that somebody's clicked into your article. And what that means is they look at the image, look at the headline, and then they left. So I just felt like, why am I doing this? Like I could go work at a better job with more money. Like, why am I doing this, writing these articles, breaking these stories if they're being read for 4 seconds on average? Like, what am I truly doing? If journalism is supposed to serve the people, the readers, they should serve the people and the readers and actually give them the information they need to stay informed and live better, healthier lives, not just break stories and headlines and write for advertisers. So I just felt like the incentives and the systems were just misaligned, and that bug just sort of just did not go away. And I ended up taking a leap the day after the election, the 2024 election. I just got so fed up with the bad people doing bad things on the internet and covering them, and my journalism just disappearing into the algorithmic ether. It just like completely enraged me. And at the same time, I felt like it was only people of older generations that were focused on the problem. Like, and a lot of them seemed like they just wanted to bring things back to the old way of doing things that just didn't feel aligned with people my age. It didn't feel like they were really building and involving Gen Z or millennials or any younger generations. Like I worked at NewsGuard. It's run by two people in their 70s. I just felt like there wasn't a company out there that was really trying to solve this from the ground up for people of the next generation. And now it's, newsreel is used by people of all ages. It's not just young people. And that's because I think what is really, I think, commonly misconstrued as just a problem for young people is really a problem for everybody. We all feel overwhelmed. We all want new platforms, new ways of accessing information. We just don't know where to start.
And then can you talk a little bit, so the newsreel is helping connect new people who want to engage or be informed
Mm-hmm.
with trusted journalists
Mm-hmm.
who are creating content on what? Like, so if you...
Yeah, talk a little bit about So we say newsreel is a news app for people who have given up on the news, and the way that we provide news is in these like digestible, interactive formats. So if you're listening to the whole podcast or a webcast, like this makes sense, right? I did a lot of research on interactivity, on gamification, and what came out of that is that the way to help people stay informed in the digital age is that you have to offer like new experiences for engaging with that information. I think it's even more relevant now with large language models. So what we do on Newsreel is if you go onto it, like it's very multimodal. Like you're gonna experience videos, infographics, social media posts, and text, but it's all curated and written by journalists that are vetted by our platform. We have our own content staff, and at the end of every story, you're asked a quiz question, a polling question, and soon there's going to be even more ways to interact with that story. So we make the process of staying informed more engaging and more fun. At the same time, we're not, dancing on TikTok about news, right? Like there is a happy medium, and like I think I'm trying to sort of move on that line. And I think this is the future. These sort of more curated social experiences online. If you look at apps like Belly or even Substack, right? Like there we are, I think, moving this direction where people are going to apps and online communities that are more purposeful. And so I want to build a different one with Newsreel.
And then in terms of the type of so people watching now or listening in the future. So two things, like what type of, like if I'm a journalist, how does someone get vetted? And then like, is it for international news, city policy,
Yeah, yeah.
sustainability? Like what are the
So it's all
topics
types of
or?
news. It's all types of
Mhm.
news. We're going to have more types of news coming on as the days progress. If you're a journalist or a news outlet that wants to publish on, you can go to our site and you fill out an application to start publishing on Newsreel. The benefits of publishing on Newsreel include you're in a like vetted community, right, where not everyone can publish and reach these new audiences. You're soon going to have revenue sharing opportunities as well. Like we just started piloting with certain creators, including ex journalists from the Washington Post and other kinds of independent journalists and news outlets. But we're going to start offering revenue sharing opportunities as well on the platform. So what I'm trying to do is build a vetted ecosystem for news, right? Like acknowledging that a lot of people want to get their news from a bunch of different sources. They like getting in digestible formats, and they like getting in formats that include podcasts and video and all kinds of different forms of media, not just articles, right? And so what I'm trying to do is offer an ecosystem for that does have some gatekeeping involved, because I I believe in that there is editing is important, editing is valuable, and that you're not going to be able to obviously uh, push people towards one source, but we can offer an alternative to social media and what people are getting from legacy news.
Okay, so you're getting lots of comments. A friend of mine who's actually a journalist in Bogota is like, awesome.
Oh, cool.
People want to try it. This is another question. Stevie's got lots of questions. So you can talk a little about the vetting, so,
Yeah, yeah.
and also let's say someone's watching this 6 months from now. So is it currently you have to be in English language, and do you have to have journalist trainings? Because there is like a
Yeah,
blurry,
yeah.
let's say gray area. Like some people are doing marketing, some are doing communications, some are doing citizen journalism. So what's the boundaries of what's acceptable?
Yeah, so all of the moderation is done on the at the beginning, right? So we're not like going back and editing journalists or flagging journalists' content. We're in the very beginning stages of this, though. To date, like most of the content, 98% of the content has been produced by our team of journalists that we hired that worked with me at Forbes or used to work at Bloomberg. They have legacy news backgrounds. What I'm envisioning for this vetting process, what we have in place right now, is that you have to be a human being that's going to produce content that at least always has a human in the loop. Yes, obviously, I know people are going to use AI tools. There's going to be some kind of editing that's done probably by a robot. If you don't, that's great, but I don't think we can guarantee that someone's not going to use AI in some form. But you promise that at least there is always a human being in the loop that is producing the content you see on Newsreel. Second, that you're tied to some kind of news publication or newsletter of some kind of stature, right? It's not just you started up a blog yesterday. You have, in other words, subject matter expertise, and I think that's very, very important for what we're trying to build, right? There's so many different ways to get information nowadays. I could get all my news from AI. I could get all my news from social media. What is going to be the differentiator here on Newsreel is depth of knowledge and subject matter expertise. So you have to have some kind of subject matter expertise. Finally, no marketing. None,
Mhm.
none at all. You're not allowed to advertise if you have some kind of like disclosure that you need to make. It will be on your profile. So if you have funding from a certain source, you better disclose up front, or you're not going to be allowed to publish on Newsreel. So
Okay.
those are the three principles we've started with. Is it going to evolve? Have I thought of everything? I've absolutely not thought of everything, and
Mhm.
I'm sure we're going to have problems. But look, I think someone's got to do this. I think we got to try. I welcome others to enter the space. because this problem is really, really hard, and it's, I think, one of the defining problems of our time.
So a couple more questions. We have like 3 minutes left. So one question. So Newsreel is a startup, or
Yeah, yeah.
so just a little bit like your thoughts on being a startup founder, the good and the bad, and for anyone who's thinking about some idea, just any thoughts like how do you decide to take that leap? Because it's terrifying and
Yeah,
exciting.
yeah. Oh, it's also the most rewarding thing in the world. I mean, I have always loved building. I have always loved offering ideas to the world, and I believe that a a really important human value, this was instilled in me by my dad, is to be a producer, not just a consumer. That there's all these opportunities to consume in life, and especially today, and to produce is really meaningful. It provides a lot of value to your life, and can enrich you in so many different ways. So that was kind of what started the bug for me. And then, I think the what's been just so valuable to me as I've gone through this journey has been, I think, the failure that I've had, learning from experiences on the fly, feeling like you're charting your own path, and that you're doing so that you're going to sink or swim because of you and what you're doing, what you're putting out into the world. That is such a unbelievably fulfilling experience. And the hard part is the other side of that, right? The loneliness that you sometimes feel, the vulnerability that you feel, putting yourself out there day after day after day after day, with some people telling you that you're an idiot, that you should not pursue this idea, that your product sucks, or that you're crazy for what you're doing, that you're never going to make money, you're never just going to succeed. You'll hear that 99 times, and then there's the one person that says, maybe this is a good idea, you should try it, and you cherish that person. You hold them dearly because they believed in you when nobody else will. And those, I think, that 1% out of 100 is the one that you keep going for. Yeah.
So a question from Juliana, based in Bogota, who is a journalist. How do you see funding opportunities for this type of initiative? So just, like there is an ecosystem like MacArthur and Fast Forward, and, there is like, Zetio, Mehdi
Yeah.
Hassan, like there are people building this, but like any insights on funding for new media startups?
Yeah, so the nonprofit route's a great route to go. Like, there are definitely a lot of nonprofits. The reason why I didn't go that route is because I didn't feel like there were funders that really would be that interested in what we're doing, because it's not public media. It's more trying to like innovate and push the format forward. It's much different than, I think, what a lot of like people in the public media funding space do, but that's a really great route to go. And some of our funding has come from the American Public Media Group's for-profit fundraising arm. So they did the American Public Media Group is one our biggest investor. They run Minnesota Public Radio and Marketplace and some other news products. They've been a terrific backer of ours, supporter of ours, and they have a for-profit funding arm. So that was one of our funders. Also, I think there's a lot of rich people out there, angels, family offices, that care about what's happening in our world and think that there's an opportunity to also possibly turn a profit, as you know, Craig. Right? There's a lot of impact funders out there right now, and I think they are really, really looking into journalism and media and how we propel this industry forward, because they see the writing on the wall. They see that AI is really going to threaten the content producing side, because the model is just further breaking. And in that world, there's also room for opportunity. It can seem bleak at times, but there is. So those are the two routes that I see. VC is obviously tough, right? It's like just not a world that I think that works necessarily with like journalism right now. It can, but it's very, very hard. It's not a route that I necessarily recommend.
Okay. So last two questions. We're just
Really?
about out of time. So one is so how can people help Newsreel? Like what's your business model? And then two, just where's the best place to follow both you as a human being and Newsreel?
Yeah. So we have started with school contracts, public library contracts, as one of our biggest sources of revenue right now. We work with a lot of universities, Penn State, Ithaca College, tons of public libraries across the country, soon in other countries as well, offering our news product to their students or their patrons. We have a classroom product specifically for classrooms. So that is one way to support us and to get involved and see the value of Newsreel. You can join and become a subscriber yourself. If you're a company, a funder, like we're raising a pre-seed round right now, looking for people to invest in Newsreel, and we have a bunch of events coming up. That we have our launch event in May, but we're going to continue doing them. So sponsors too, who want to get access to the next generation, to the next generation of creators and journalists and media companies, like we're curating those conversations as well.
And then best channel to follow you or Newsreel? Like, does Newsreel
Oh,
have its own newsletter? Go to the app or follow you on LinkedIn, or what's
for the
your
story
preferred?
behind Newsreel, yeah, I would follow on my LinkedIn. I also have a newsletter as well that I put out called "The Medium is the Message." But most of the updates you can find on LinkedIn right now. Yeah.
Okay. Any last comments or anything else you want
No,
people to know?
I welcome anybody. Thank you, first of all, for having me. I welcome anybody to shoot me a message. I'd be happy to talk to you about what we're doing and offer any kind of advice. And my last parting words is like this is it can seem like a bleak time with everything that's going on. It's a very turbulent period of history that we're living through. And my advice to everybody is to build. It's to take the tools of our time and apply them to enact the kind of change that you want in the world.
Thank you so much for your time and everyone for joining from around the world. And just as we started off, please follow Jack and Newsreel. Please check out and try the app. Please share it widely. Please check out PCN and the podcast. And thank you, Jack, for everything you're doing in its amazing platform. And hope it has a huge impact and grows and becomes sustainable. Thank you,
Thank
everyone.
you.